The Arizona night was so dry and clear that one could hear the rustle of dust as the wind scraped against the screen door on the porch. On the worn oak table, Eleanor Brooks set down the ivory white tablecloth she reserved only for deep breath, occasions her name for dinners where her gut told her something was about to fall out of sync. The scent of green chili cumin and sea bass smoke wandering through the ranch-style dining room seemed to reassure the house everything was still normal. The soft golden light from the ceiling lamp shone down on the white earthenware dishes, illuminating the wrinkles at the corner of Eleanor's eyes where time had etched the word experienced. Stephen, her eldest son, moved between the kitchen and the dining table, setting a bowl for Matthew, the 7-year-old boy, who always smiled with both dimples. On the stove, Marisol, his wife, flipped a piece of fish, the fat sizzling sharply in the pan, her hair neatly tied back, her light blue dress ironed flat as always. She turned smiling, "Mom, a little more lemon." Eleanor nodded, picking up the scented candle to light it. The flame caught, trembled for a single instant, then stood straight, as composed as an adult who has decided not to lie. The doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Stephen said, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. Eleanor stepped ahead of him by half a beat, a habit hard to break from when Stephen was a child, and opened the door. Ivan stood there, his dark brown eyes still tired from a connecting flight. Beside him was a woman with dark hair tied low, wearing a cream cotton dress, her hands clutching a cloth tote bag. Her face brought time in the house to a halt. She resembled Marisol down to every feature. The only difference was a submissive gaze, a slight awkwardness of someone unfamiliar with standing at another person's front door. The air tightened like a stretched string. At the dinner table, Stephen's fork dropped to the surface, a soft sound in the profound silence. Matthew tiptoed, peering over his father's shoulder. "Why? Are there two moms?" Marisol stepped out from the kitchen, the fresh scent of lemon still lingering on her fingertips. She froze upon facing her own reflection, only distinguished by the hairstyle and the way the other woman's eyes avoided confrontation. What game are you playing?" Marisol asked, her voice not loud but sharp as a glass rim. She glanced at Ivan, knowing he was the unexposed link in this room. Eleanor gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. She gave a slight nod to Ivan. He placed a stack of papers on the table, prints from the electronic passport data his colleague had extracted from the system, entry-exit stamps from France within the exact time frame when 3 days prior Ivan had called home and heard running water in the upstairs bathroom, and Marisol's voice calling down, "Mom, I'll be quick in the shower." She was sitting first class next to a man named Graham Whitfield, Ivan said, his voice as even as reading a pre-takeoff checklist. "I saw her. I even picked up her passport while checking the boarding gate. I went down to the cabin to check she was sitting right there." Marisol looked at the papers, then at Eleanor, then at her own blue dress as if to use color to assert her presence. She gave a small, pointed laugh. "A passport is paper. The person is here." She pointed at herself, emphasizing each word as if pressing against a facade. Eleanor leaned aside, making way for the woman next to Ivan. "Daughter, what is your name?" she asked. "Isadora," the woman said, her voice faint but not wavering. "Isadora Vega." Stephen leaned forward as if to make sure his eyes weren't being tricked by an impolite magic trick. He looked at Isadora, then turned to Marisol, his face transforming like a blueprint caught in the rain, straight lines blurring structures, shaking. "Stevenstown," Isadora began before anyone could assign her a title. I covered for her a few times. I'm sorry. I needed money for my foster parents' medication. She paid me to stay at home, go shopping, pick up Matthew, cook a few dishes, babysit for a few hours. Be quiet," Marisol cut her off, her eyes shining like metal in the sun. "Don't make up stories for extra money." "Make up." Ivan placed another small stack of papers, a screenshot from a phone camera, in the cabin. Marisol, or someone identical to Marisol, leaning toward a man in a dark blue suit, neat salt and pepper hair, a glass of champagne on the tray table. Their lips were close enough that no one had to hear their voices except themselves. Matthew took a step back, clutching his grandmother's trousers. I like Mom yesterday. Yesterday, Mom sang Cielito Lindo. Today, Mom isn't looking at me. Eleanor heard the child sniffle like the creak of old wood. It was the house's confession. She raised her chin just enough to look directly into her daughter-in-law's eyes. We are not passing judgment here. We are asking for the truth. Why are there two women with the same face emerging from two different places? Why was one sitting first class next to Graham Whitfield while the other was telling me she was just wading through soap upstairs? Marisol maintained a long silence. Then she exploded, because I'm sick of this house. Because I'm sick of shaking out tablecloths, wiping away the smudges from the dinner plan you kept drawing over and over without finishing. Because I want more. Graham gives me that. And you, Stephen, you only know how to dream about houses you'll never build. Stephen sat down as if a chair had been pulled out from under him. Matthew burst into tears, a small, fragile cry, not loud, but forcing the adults to breathe slower. Ivan took a half step toward his brother, then stopped, knowing that the person who needed to touch Stephen right now wasn't another man, but the truth. Eleanor hugged her grandson, her eyes never leaving Marisol. At this age, she said slowly, I learned one thing. Silence is complicity. I am at fault. I loved my son by protecting him for too long, making him weak at the boundary. Today I take responsibility to speak up to begin to correct the mistake. And what do you choose? Marisol glanced at Isadora, her gaze a sharp arrow. Don't play the saint here, she said coldly. Then Marisol grabbed her purse and walked out the door. When the door closed, the sound of the hinge was like the snapping of a broken promise. No one chased after her. From the kitchen, the baked fish had reached its perfect readiness, releasing a sweet, slightly burnt aroma. Matthew rubbed his eyes on his grandmother's shirt. Stephen pressed his hand to his forehead, his thumb rubbing the brow bone, as if trying to erase the deep fold line in his skin. Ivan stood close by, saying nothing more. Eleanor finally released the long breath she hadn't allowed herself since opening the door. The truth hurts, she whispered, then it heals. The night of confrontation ended without the sound of broken dishes. There was only the clink of a spoon against a bowl, as Eleanor scooped a serving for Matthew, though he barely ate a few spoonfuls. Isadora stood nearby, holding the blender, as if unsure what to do with her hands other than tremble. Eleanor scooped her a small bowl of soup, pushing it toward her. Eat, my dear, she said, calling Isadora my dear Con out of motherly instinct. Isadora looked into her eyes. For the first time that evening, her gaze didn't flinch away. An hour later, after Matthew was asleep and Stephen had locked the garage, Eleanor brewed a pot of black tea. Ivan sat down in the chair opposite her. Isadora sat tentatively, her back straight, as if afraid her weight would break something in this house. Tell me everything from the beginning, Eleanor said, her eyes fixed on the table like a blank piece of paper ready for writing. Ivan recounted the phone call at Sky Harbor, the speaker announcing boarding, the clatter of rolling luggage on the wood floor. A passport dropped at the gate, flipping it open, and seeing the name Marisol Vega Brooks clearly printed beneath a photo of those exact eyes. He told of running down to the cabin to confirm the woman sitting near the window, hair neatly pinned in an ivory blouse. Her eyes angled toward the man next to her, the distance close enough for people to use mutually possessive pronouns. Ivan recounted the silence when he called his mother, the sound of water running upstairs. Marisol's voice echoing down, I'll be quick in the shower, and the way he had to swallow before saying, Mom, I have her right here in front of me. Eleanor nodded lightly, tapping the rim of the teacup like a conductor tapping a beat for the strings to enter the chorus. And you, she turned to Isadora, you tell your part. Isadora looked down at her hands for a moment, as if apologizing to them for using them to touch a house that wasn't hers. I met her at the farmer's market. At first I thought I was looking in a mirror. She stared at me for a long time, then smiled and asked my name, asked where I lived. The next time we met, she said she needed my help a few hours each week. Grocery shopping, making soup, reminding Matthew to brush his teeth, taking the boy to school. She said she was busy with outside work, family, friends, to meet charity projects, to attend. She paid good money. My foster parents, one needs medicine, the other can't work anymore. She looked up at Eleanor, her dark eyes filling with tears. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have, but I thought I was just grocery shopping, cooking, temporarily house sitting. I didn't think it would turn into something like tonight. Did she mention the man? Ivan asked. Isadora shook her head. I only heard Lucy, my roommate, say that she had a coffee with an older, elegant man. Lucy overheard them calling each other honey. Lucy eavesdropped on his name being Graham Whitfield. I didn't ask anything more. I was afraid if I asked, I'd know more than poverty allows. The sentence slipped out like a knife edge against the wall of poverty. People rarely speak aloud. Eleanor poured more tea, her hand steady. Take me to your home tomorrow, she said to Isadora. I want to greet your foster parents. Ivan looked up. Mom? Mom knows what to do about her own share of the mistake. She cut off her son, her voice not loud but firm. I protected Stephen for too long, turning him into a man who avoids conflict. Today I start correcting that, and part of correcting it is not letting a poor woman go through her mistake alone. Daughter, she turned to Isadora, your biggest mistake was lending your face for someone else's agenda. But that mistake can be corrected with a different face, the face that knows how to look straight ahead. Isadora lightly gripped the teacup handle. I will go with you. Call me Eleanor, she said, then smiled, or Mom if you find it easier. For the first time that evening, Isadora offered a genuine smile, though it was just a small ripple on the surface of a lake when the wind has stopped. The night the ranch house was as quiet as an adult who knows how to hold their breath. Stephen opened Matthew's door, standing to watch his son sleep, the boy's hand clutching his stuffed bear, his mouth slightly ajar as if continuing an unfinished story in his dream. He closed the door, leaned his back against the wall, and let out a long breath. Eleanor stood at the end of the hallway where the family photo from Stephen and Marisol's wedding hung. Are you okay? She asked. Stephen nodded a mechanical nod. He walked toward the photo, looking at the bride in the white dress Marisol, her smile wide and warm back then. I thought, he said slowly, that if I worked hard, if I held back my own needs, if I was honest, everything would naturally align into happiness like a Lego house. I forgot that people can also dismantle each other for a different dream. He turned to his mother. Don't be angry with yourself, Mom. I'm a grown man. I let someone else dictate the climate in my house. Eleanor looked at her son. For 10 seconds she wanted to hug him tightly like when he fell off his bike at age 5. But she knew love that tightly embraces is the kind of affection that prevents people from learning how to balance. She just placed her hand on Stephen's shoulder, pressing lightly. Tomorrow you'll hurt with the withdrawal symptoms, then you'll stand. When you stand, remember to remind yourself that setting boundaries is not being ungrateful. Stephen nodded this time genuinely. I'll try. He quirked a smile. I'm also going to call the counselor at work, something I always thought was only for other people. Good. Eleanor said the word good pronounced softly like a cotton towel. The next morning, the Arizona sun rose early like a poor laborer. Sunlight touched the backyard where the tomato plants she grew were lined up in small, tranquil rows. Eleanor brewed black coffee, opening the leather-bound notebook she called the house book. She wrote a few lines in neat block letters, Night of Confrontation. I spoke. It hurt. It didn't kill anyone. Start correcting today. Do not hide difficult things under the tablecloth. 2. Do not speak for others. 3. Do not let poverty be used as an excuse for people to stop being honest. After writing, she underlined it lightly, then looked up, taking a deep breath. The sound of the air conditioning had been off since the sun cleared the roof tiles. The house was breathing with the sound of wood expanding. She could hear it. Isadora arrived right on time. Lucy came along carrying a paper bag with the name of a generic drug company written on it, her sharp eyes still gentle. Ivan drove. Stephen stayed home with Matthew. The boys still needed a morning where the adults chose to say less. Eleanor locked the door, looking straight into the sun, a direct gaze. The alley behind the working-class neighborhood on 7th Ave had nothing worth a tourist stopping to photograph. The walls were scarred, the paint peeling like dry skin. The wooden door of number 14 was dark, the doorknob worn smooth from many hands touching it without leaving a sound. Isadora knocked 3 light times. The door opened. Inside, the smell of disinfectant, sweat, and blankets not dried in time. Mr. Jones lay on the iron bed, his thin shoulders shaking with every cough. Mrs. Jones, white-haired, her eyes clouded by time, lay on her side, her breathing shallow. Lucy went first, speaking like someone who had rehearsed her words so they wouldn't turn into pity. That would defeat the listener. This is Ms. Eleanor. Eleanor walked closer to Mrs. Jones, taking her hand, a hand cold and light as paper printed too many times. I am Stephen's mother, she said. Stephen is Marisol Vega's husband. Mrs. Jones looked up, blinking slowly, then sniffing as if marking a new line. She spoke in fragments like someone reading an old letter. I used to be a nurse. A young mother gave birth to twins. They were poor. They said they couldn't raise both. They left one behind. I carried that baby home. I was afraid people would say I stole her, but I couldn't leave a baby behind. I raised her. I didn't ask anyone anything more. I only knew how to love. She is Isadora. Eleanor placed both hands on the edge of the bed. Do you keep any documents? Isadora opened the wooden drawer, a stained envelope, a blurry photocopy of a birth certificate, a birth date, matching the date Marisol recorded on the marriage license. Eleanor exhaled like someone who finally heard the rhythm of a slow-moving song. The solution was not magic. It was the old tragedy of poor women. She turned to Isadora. You and Marisol are twins, she said directly. The sentence fell onto the cement floor, met by a small crack sound in someone's chest. Isadora braced herself against the table edge to keep from falling. So, why did she never tell me? Why did she use me without telling me? No one in the room had an immediate answer. The silence here wasn't complicity. It was the space before a big wind. Eleanor placed a stack of envelopes on the table. This is the temporary health insurance I've registered for your foster parents. I'm not using this to buy anyone's conscience. I'm doing it because it's right. I'm not saving anyone. I'm just making it so breathing isn't so hard. She turned to Isadora. I will make dinner tonight. You and Lucy eat with us. Tomorrow I'm going to see a family court lawyer, not to make drama, to end things the right way. Isadora nodded, her tears receding as soon as they reached her lids, like a wave that knows its own weariness. I'll go with you, with Mom. That afternoon, Eleanor returned, opened the house door, and stood for a moment on the threshold like someone standing on the border between the desert and the shade. Stephen sat at the table, his head bowed over a stack of papers, divorce forms. He wasn't crying. Rachel, the family court lawyer Eleanor called, had advised, tears blur the eyes, signatures need to be seen clearly. Matthew sat next to him, coloring a drawing with 2 houses, one roof red, one roof yellow. This is our house, he pointed to the yellow roof, and this is someone else's house. I don't want to live in that house. It's sad there. You're in this house, Stephen said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. He turned to Eleanor. I won't be a hero. I'll be a real person. I'll seek custody of Matthew. I won't make accusations. I'll just present the truth. That's enough, Eleanor said. The truth is enough. She glanced at the clock. Call Ivan. Tell him he doesn't need to come tonight. He should get some sleep. He's been flying continuously all night. Stephen nodded. He stood up, pouring his mother a glass of water. Are you tired? He asked. The question was simple, but the way he asked it made Eleanor suddenly feel that her talkative little boy had learned an adult question. No, she said honestly. I'm well in the way that I know where I'll fall if I'm not careful. Night fell on Phoenix like a thin wool blanket. The kitchen quieted. The dishwasher hummed softly. Stephen sat at the table, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the wood surface to a tune that only someone who just realized they weren't dead could hear. Isadora washed Matthew's small cup softly humming the first line of Cielito Lindo, then stopping as if afraid singing it wrong would spoil the peaceful atmosphere. "Keep singing," Eleanor said, leaning against the doorframe, her voice warm. "If you sing it wrong, sing it again." Isadora smiled, continued singing. The first few notes were hesitant, but by the I part. Matthew rushed in from the living room, adding a layer of small voice to the melody. Stephen looked up, his eyes softening by half a degree. Eleanor opened the house book and wrote an addition. We sang it again. The rhythm is still rough, but it's a rhythm. She closed the notebook, looking around. The old house breathed evenly. She thought about tomorrow visiting Mr. and Mrs. Jones with some fruit, calling the counselor. Stephen said he'd see taking photos of the civil documents so no one would be lost in the system. And the hardest part, writing a letter to Marisol not to send, but just to remove the thorn of hatred from her own heart. She remembered the quote she once wrote in the house book, "Boundary is love with a spine." Tonight, the boundary was reestablished not with brick walls, but with a brightly lit dinner table. In the middle of the night, Eleanor woke up for water. She passed Matthew's room. The boy was asleep, still clutching his bear. She passed the garage. Stephen had hung his hard hat on the hook, standing to admire a new sketch. An open kitchen light over the sink, a countertop wide enough for 3 people to stand side by side without bumping shoulders. "That's beautiful," Eleanor said. Stephen turned around, smiling for the first time that day. "I think, Ma," he said, "I'll make this first for our house." A sentence that could be read as a blueprint for calm muscle. She stepped out onto the porch. The Arizona night scattered thin stardust. Somewhere the neighbor's small windmill turned, emitting a repetitive click, click sound. Eleanor leaned her hand on the porch railing, breathing deeply. The smell of dry earth, the scent of someone who keeps up the habit of watering plants even though it rarely rains. She felt the night was long but not endless. She turned back in, closed the door, and turned off the light. The house sighed gently. Sunday morning, Eleanor woke up early, opened the refrigerator for milk. She saw a small note from Stephen under the magnet on the door. "Mom, I have counseling at the community center this afternoon, 3 to 5 p.m. Isadora will pick up Matthew at 4 after his play date. I'll cook dinner. Don't turn on the stove." Next to the note, Matthew had drawn a crooked heart inside, which he wrote home. Eleanor smiled, plugging in the kettle. As the water began to boil, she heard Isadora's light footsteps entering the kitchen. "Morning, Mom," she said. "May I ask, can I clear a drawer for myself? I don't want to touch Marisol's things." She spoke the other woman's name not with hatred, but with a necessary categorization. "Of course," Eleanor replied. "Put your things in the 3rd drawer from the top. That one used to hold expired baking soda." Isadora opened the old drawer, took out the hardened spices, and put them in the trash bag. Her movements were no longer hesitant. They had a rhythm reserved for those who know they will stay. "Mom," she said after a moment of quiet, "last night I remembered my foster mother often said, 'Poverty is when you need help, but poverty is not allowed to make you lie.' Today I want to start not lying." Eleanor set the cup down on the saucer, a small but firm clink. "You started last night," she said. "Today is just singing it again." In the living room, Matthew turned on the TV, but muted the sound, letting the bright images dance on the screen like a backdrop that requires no explanation. Stephen walked through, ruffling his son's hair. He looked at the clock, picked up his keys, and paused where Eleanor stood. "I'm leaving now." He looked at his mother, then at Isadora, his gaze like a pencil that had finally been sharpened. It would draw more decisively. "Go," Eleanor said. "Lateness is the favorite excuse of people who keep postponing growing up." Stephen smiled. He opened the door, and the sun hit his face like an invitation to leave the house and step into the truth outside. The door closed. The sound of the deadbolt locking was like someone nodding. Eleanor turned back to the kitchen, opened the house book, and added another line, Part 1. The confrontation. The boundary is drawn. Tomorrow, grocery shopping, paying the electricity bill, washing the old set of dishes, working with the lawyer, planting another row of basil. Love needs a spine, but it also needs fragrance. She paused, put the pen down, and looked up. On the counter, a red woven basket lay next to the blue woven basket Isadora carried. Eleanor thought of the markets to come, when the red or blue basket would just be a basket, no longer the sign of a lie. She reached out and lightly touched the handle of the basket, as if touching an item that had ceased to be a prop, returning to its humble function, bringing food home. Outside, the Arizona sun retreated from the porch, yielding a strip of shade. Eleanor looked through the window, seeing a sparrow land on the fence, lightly preening its feathers, seemingly uncaring about the papers that had just been signed. She smiled. Within her, a new empty space opened up, not from loss, but from clearing room for clean things. She heard the house breathe again, more steadily than last night. And as that breath harmonized with the bubbling water in the kettle, Eleanor knew the first part of the story could stand on its own 2 feet. The next part, the small signs would demand patient eyes. She had those eyes, and this time she wouldn't close them to any detail just because it wasn't convenient for dinner. She turned off the stove, poured tea, and called out to the living room. "Matthew, bring your notebook. Grandma wants to practice singing Cielito Lindo in the right rhythm." Small feet came running. Isadora stood behind, smiling, her hand resting on the back of a chair like placing a promise. Somewhere in the thin, dusty sunlight of Phoenix, another story less dramatic, slower began. It didn't need fireworks. It needed the soft clink of a spoon against a cup, a reminder that peace isn't something that falls down. Peace is something people brew when they take the time to count the seconds the water boils. The dial-up phone rang out in the middle of the night, tearing the house that was trying to learn how to breathe peacefully in two. Eleanor sprang up, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. On the other end was Marisol's voice, whispering like an open switchblade. "If you let that girl Isadora lurk near my house again, I'll make you all regret it. You think you won, I'm just getting started." Then the line cut off. No sorry, no let's talk later. Only the long, taut dial tone remained like a nerve about to snap. Eleanor stood in the dark living room holding the house book. She had forgotten to close the page open to the line she had just written that evening. Composure is muscle. She inhaled deeply, counted to 3, 1, 2, 3, then exhaled, setting the phone down like a hot stone. The next morning, the Phoenix sunlight poured down like a fresh coat of plaster. Stephen sat silently at the dining table next to him, the stack of documents lawyer Rachel had emailed, the step-by-step instructions, asset preservation. Divorce procedures, visitation, rights, documentation. Isadora and Lucy had arrived early. Lucy placed a box of butter cookies on the table. The warm scent of cinnamon made the old kitchen look as if it had just been wiped clean with pure light. Matthew colored the 2-roofed house with crayons, adding a small upstairs window, and asked casually, "Grandma, does our house have a nose?" Eleanor laughed. "Yes, and it can usually smell trouble from a long way off." "Rachel said she might drop by this morning for signatures," Stephen said, his voice hoarse. "Ivan messaged that his flight lands at 11. He's coming straight here." Isadora fiddled with the edge of the kitchen towel, her large, dewy eyes bright, but holding back tears. I want to tell everything, not to justify myself, just so everyone knows where I went wrong." Lucy sat beside her, nodding her hand on the back of Isadora's like a paperweight. "Tell it. Name it. Let the truth stand firm." Isadora began. Her voice was small, steady, as if threading through a narrow door crack. "When I was 17, I was waitressing at a diner near the market, the one with the old Texas flags. One day Marisol walked in. I had never seen anyone so much like me. She froze too. We stared at each other like looking in a mirror. She asked my name, my birthday. When she knew they matched, she laughed, then cried, then said, 'Maybe we're twins.' I thought it was a gift from God. She texted her number, asked to meet, said she wanted to help my family. My foster parents were sick. Medicine was expensive." Isadora swallowed the kitchen towel, crumpled into a wrinkled flower. The first time she asked me to come to her house for a few hours, she said it was to house sit, said it was a surprise for my husband. I didn't think anything of it. I wore the clothes she gave me, learned how to tie my hair, how to say Mom to Mrs. Brooks in a light voice. I thought it was a harmless game. Then the next time she gave me more money, told me to do the groceries, pick up Matthew, answer neighbors, and then left for a few hours. I asked where she went. She said project interviews. Lucy chimed in. Once I followed her. Marisol went into a boutique hotel in Scottsdale, met a man in a gray suit, his hair neatly styled in a classic cut Charles Thompson. They sat close, their hands touching. Stephen clenched the chair armrests, his knuckles white. Eleanor placed her hand on her son's, pressing once. Don't let anger drive. Lucy lowered her voice. I knew she was using Isadora as a screen. I'm sorry that I saw it and didn't dare speak up. Eleanor nodded. Every fault needs to be named and put in its place. Your part is yours. The rest let others carry. She flipped to a new page in the housebook, writing. Isadora told debt. Lucy told courage. Stephen heard pain, me holding the rhythm. At noon, Rachel arrived, charcoal blazer hair in a low bun, her eyes as alert as an hour hand. I've filed the temporary asset preservation order, she said, laying out 3 copies, and the request for the court to grant temporary child custody to Stephen, along with a description of Matthew's current living environment and routine. Rachel looked around the clean wood floor, the tidy kitchen, the counseling schedule posted on the wall. They say the house is the best evidence of fitness. She smiled faintly. We have one more task, building the pattern of manipulation file documenting every time Marisol disappeared, every time Isadora was asked to stand in every text, frantic call, everything. I know it hurts to do it, but it gives justice something to hold on to. Stephen nodded. I'm ready. He looked at Isadora. And I'm sorry I left you alone in front of her for too long. I thought I was being fair by not interfering. In reality, I was a coward. Isadora shook her head rapidly, tears welling up. No, you're not. Eleanor cut in softly. Let him finish. An apology doesn't need to be forgiven right away. It needs to be heard completely. Stephen looked at her, his eyes warm. I was wrong for not seeing that you were dragged into this, not the one pulling the strings. I promise from now on I won't use silence, hoping for peace. Ivan opened the door, right then, his hair messy from the plain wind, his smile tired but bright. Mom, I'm here, he said, giving her a quick hug like a heartbeat. I have this. Ivan placed a printed copy from the airline system on the table, the flight log, passenger name, electronic passport photo. Phoenix-Paris flight last week, Marisol Brooks, first class seat 2A, boarding 10:43 a.m. Look at the entry-exit stamps section. Rachel leaned down, her eyes scanning like a machine. Enough. She looked up. As I said, you don't need caught-in-the-act evidence in a bed to prove infidelity. But this, her telling her mother-in-law she was in the shower at the same time she was sitting on a plane, is enough for the court to see a pattern of intentional deception. I will attach it. Ivan sat down, pouring himself a glass of water. I hate the feeling of bringing bad news home, but I want our home to be free of illusion. In the afternoon, as the sunlight slanted through the curtains, Eleanor decided to visit Mr. and Mrs. Jones with Isadora. She brought 2 bags, one with food, one with white paper pens, and a small voice recorder. Today we're working like craftsmen, she said in the car, measuring, cutting, assembling. No crying until the work is done. Isadora compressed her lips, nodding. The house in the Camelback Alley was as old as the day before, stained walls, a wooden door, with loose hinges, the smell of disinfectant mixed with menthol rub. Mrs. Jones lay on her side, her eyes cloudy but sharp, with the kind of gaze a poor person never allowed herself to overlook. Eleanor held her hand. Today we need you to tell us more. Your daughter Isadora needs her roots, and my grandson Stephen needs the axis of truth. Mrs. Jones breathed hoarsely. That day, it was a small hospital near the border town. That family came late at night. Their daughter gave birth to twins. The husband's face was ashen, the wife exhausted. They said they couldn't afford two. I couldn't stand the thought of leaving a baby in the abandonment room. I carried her away. They agreed. I thought I saved a life. I never knew that the debt would be repaid this way. She looked towards Isadora, her voice trembling like an old neon light. I'm sorry, my daughter. Isadora knelt, embracing her hand. You don't owe me. I'm alive because of you. Eleanor turned on the recorder. She asked each question slowly, clearly. Doctor's name, year. Any detail to trace. Mrs. Jones struggled to recall the doctor's name, Hernandez, and the rough town name, Nogales. Eleanor took careful notes, adding a description of the smell of the hospital corridor on a rainy day. She knew those details wouldn't stand in court, but they stood in memory. Lucy arrived later, carrying a bundle of photocopied documents. I asked my cousin, who works at the clerk's office, to search for a few birth records from that year. There are 2 records marked female unnamed 1 and female unnamed 02. I'm not sure, but the dates match. If we're lucky, we can find the original case file number. Eleanor looked down at the pile of papers, ordinary black and white text, but supporting an entire lifetime. That's enough, she whispered, not necessarily to anyone. Leaving the alley, the afternoon sun coated the 2 women like tinfoil. Isadora leaned her head against the car window, her eyes sparkling with tears but clear. Before I thought I was Marisol's shadow. It turns out I am the real one. You always were real, Eleanor replied. You just used to stand in the wrong light. That night, Eleanor gathered all the papers into a clear plastic box labeled File Do Not Touch. She placed it on a high shelf within adult reach. She thought of the quote Carl told Stephen, "Don't store pain in a shoebox under the bed. Put it in a file cabinet, label it, and let it stand where the light touches." The next day was a day of small things compounding into big ones. Matthew brought his writing homework to show off a short paragraph. I thank Grandma for teaching me to count 1, 2, 3 and breathe, which made Eleanor pretend to look away to swallow a tear. Stephen redrew the kitchen floor plan, calculating every inch for the oak island. He suddenly felt his old profession, which had only been a way to make a living, was today a track leading him out of the quicksand. Ivan ran back and forth between the house and the garage, installing an old camera set he bought on eBay for Peace of Mind Mom, and Lucy wrote a long email subject, Draft Statement When Needed. In the afternoon, Eleanor sat at the dining table, twisting her ballpoint pen, writing a short list, Lawyer Rachel done, Group Counselor Carl done, Matthew's school appointment done, Family Dr. Matthew's checkup done, Kitchen Miguel weekend, Reliable Neighbor Mrs. Collins update. She paused at the last line, adding, Journalist, not yet, waiting for Lucy's decision. She folded the notebook, placing it neatly. That evening, Stephen sat on the porch, dialing Marisol's number. I'm calling to say this one last time clearly, he began. From now on, all communication goes through the lawyers. If you want to see your son, there's a schedule, clear conditions. I'm not listening to I miss you anymore, not because I'm leveling up, but because I'm coming down to earth. The other side was silent, then burst out a dry laugh. You talk like your old man. Yeah, Stephen replied, and this time I choose where I get old. At this point, life seemed to be settling into a rhythm. But those accustomed to pulling strings don't let go easily. One Wednesday noon, Eleanor had just set a tray of cookies on the table when her phone rang an unknown number. She picked up, Mrs. Brooks, I'm Karen Holt, CPS. Yes. We've received another anonymous complaint. Content. Child Matthew is being excessively cared for by a strange woman, Isadora causing parental identity confusion. Mrs. Eleanor is psychologically influencing her grandson through obsessive documentation. Karen exhaled softly into the phone. I don't conclude anything based on a complaint. I'm on my way over. Eleanor thanked her, hung up, looking at the tray of cookies as if at a thin shield. Okay, she said aloud, as if instructing the house to stand in position. We are prepared. She wiped her hands, called Stephen up from the garage, messaged Ivan to turn on the cameras, and told Matthew, "A guest will be coming soon to ask questions. Just tell the truth. You don't need to remember any instructions." "The truth doesn't need a script." Isadora nodded, her throat dry but her eyes steady. Before Karen arrived, the doorbell rang. Eleanor opened it. A bouquet of white orchids was placed on the doorstep with a card, "For the house that always knows how to breathe, G." She mentally noted Graham. She carried the flowers to the sink, pulled out the card, put it in a sealed plastic bag, writing a note, "Exhibit passive harassment." Then she placed it in the "File Do Not Touch" box. The front door knocked again, 3 knocks, then silence, then 2 firm knocks. Eleanor gripped the doorknob, inhaling deeply. She looked at her son, at Isadora, at Matthew. "Ready?" she whispered. She opened the door. The midday sun poured in, reflecting off Karen Holt's CPS badge. "Hello, ma'am. Shall we begin?" Karen said. Behind her were 2 colleagues' tablets ready. Eleanor leaned aside, offering way. "Please come in," she said. "My house has tea, cookies, and the truth." But before that door closed, part 2 still needs to fill in the deeper gaps, the motivations, the cuts, the long-delayed decisions. After the confrontation dinner in part 1, when Isadora stood as an undistorted mirror, when Marisol screamed when Stephen was silent, when Matthew asked, "Why do I have 2 moms?" Eleanor spent 3 consecutive nights sitting alone at the dining table writing, not for anyone to read, but so she wouldn't slide back into her old way of loving, by covering up, by tidying up other people's messes and calling it sacrifice. She wrote down the things she did wrong with her late husband, the man who passed away too soon, leaving her with 2 sons and a void she filled with iron discipline. "I taught my sons, don't make your father sad, instead of listen to your sadness." She confessed, then wrote, "I taught them to avoid the storm, not to shut the door, brace themselves, and wait for the storm to pass." That line was the first nail she drove into the new framework of her life. Stephen, after that dinner, drove around Phoenix until midnight, finally parking at an empty lot overlooking the Camelback Mountains, where every night cars silently parked like heavy, unnamed thoughts. He sat in the car, turning off the radio, listening to the engine cool down. He thought about the wedding ceremony, which now looked like a quickly assembled stage. He thought about the times he let Marisol too easily say, "They're just friends," with eyes glued to her phone. He thought about the phrase, "A good man is silent," which he had turned into a mantra to avoid the hard work. He dialed Carl, the group coordinator. I don't want to become a lighter version of my father," Stephen said, his voice breaking. "The man who went to work every day, gave money, was silent, and then died of a heart attack and buried self-pity," Carl replied softly, like a bass line under a melody. "Then next week you start learning the second word after no, ask for help. And you've already said it." Isadora spent a day walking along Central Ave, stopping at every place with a "now hiring" sign, coffee shops, pet stores, used bookstores. She wanted to work, earn a paycheck, repay with labor the money Eleanor had quietly placed on the table for Mrs. Jones. At the Desert Pages bookstore, the owner, a middle-aged woman with curly hair wearing a T-shirt with a Maya Angelou quote, looked at Isadora's thin resume, smiling. "We need someone to organize books, tolerate dust, and tolerate silence." Isadora said yes, like someone who had found the right pitch for a musical note. That evening she went home, sat in the corner of the kitchen, learning to pronounce authors' names correctly. Joan Didion, Toni Morrison, James Baldwin. Eleanor walked by listening, never thinking she would one day find hope in the way a girl read the name of a writer. Lucy, after years of being invisible, caring for the elderly, cleaning houses, working double night shifts, decided to call a free legal aid hotline for witnesses. "My name is Lucy Miller," she said. "I once stood in the hallway of an illegal adoption facility. I don't have video, but I have eyes, ears, and a memory. She turned her back on me, but I've turned my face to it." On the other end, the staff member said, "We hear you clearly. Please come in, bring any paper you have, and bring someone you trust." Lucy immediately texted Eleanor tomorrow, 10 a.m. "I need you to come with me." Eleanor replied, "I will bring a pen and water." Ivan, back in the sky, sat in the cockpit, the instrument panel lights blue like a swimming pool at midnight. He looked at the gauges, altitude, speed, fuel, and thought about the gauges at home, his mother's breathing, Matthew's sleep rhythm, Stephen's heart rate while reading the divorce papers. For the first time, he saw clearly that his profession wasn't just about taking people places. It taught him to remain calm in the face of blinking warning lights. He texted Stephen before takeoff. "Warning doesn't mean falling. It means correct procedure is needed. We'll follow the correct procedure, brother. You on the ground, me in the air." Where was Marisol Knight? After night, she changed sleeping locations like changing roles. One night in Charles Thompson's luxurious apartment on the 23rd floor, overlooking a pool as blue as a glowing fish's eye. One night at a new blonde friend's house from yoga class. One night in a hotel sometimes rented by the hour in Tempe. She texted Stephen using a tug-of-war strategy, sometimes affectionate, "I'm scared," sometimes sarcastic, "coward," sometimes negotiating split the house, sometimes threatening CPS. She called Graham honey to his face, but in her head she called him the staircase, a slippery step, but one that led her out of the place she was tired of. She thought she was controlling the game. She didn't know that men like Graham don't let others stand at eye level unless that person has something they can't buy: files, stories, witnesses. And Graham, he walked into a glass-walled conference room on the 30th floor, looking at the city spread out like a silver platter. He signed countless papers handed to him by a handsome assistant, listening to his lawyer say temporary, preliminary investigation, careful media exposure. He wanted to make one phone call that could sweep everything clean, but he also knew the times weren't like 10 years ago, social media young, but tough local journalists, old ladies like Eleanor, who no longer believed in smooth sailing. He changed tactics, flowers, gifts, affection, relationship. He texted Marisol, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." He didn't know those few words were already the sign of a boat beginning to be overloaded. In all of this, Matthew was the only one living his true age, 7. The little boy occasionally sobbed uncontrollably at inconvenient times before school in the church pew when he saw a woman with black hair and a blue dress in the supermarket. Eleanor hugged him, counting 1, 2, 3 with her hand. Stephen knelt to his eye level, saying, "You don't have to be strong. You just need to be real." Isadora sat beside him, not promising everything will be all right, just softly singing, I, canta y no llores. Matthew smiled through his tears. That song was the anchor line. On Saturday, Stephen took Matthew for a haircut. The boy sat on the high chair draped in a cape, watching his hair fall like small patches of clouds. The barber, a Mexican uncle, asked Stephen in a friendly voice, "Things stable at home?" Stephen sighed, "Not yet, but getting there." The uncle nodded, showing Matthew the mirror. Guapo. Stepping out into the sun, Stephen felt an unbidden lightness. A neat haircut. Small things is sometimes the beginning of a new life. The insistent knocking at the door sounded like a judge's gavel. 3 knocks, then silence, then 2 more so firm that Matthew jumped and dropped his crayon. Eleanor, who was pouring tea, her hand accustomed to life's ups and downs, paused for a fraction of a second, just enough to know a different wind was about to blow through the house. Stephen strode to the door. On the porch, the Arizona midday sun was blindingly bright, reflecting off the badge of the woman leading the group of 3, a Child Protective Services CPS worker. Light blue shirt, neatly tied, hair, focused eyes. "I'm Karen Holt," she said, her voice gentle but firm, presenting her ID. "We've received an anonymous complaint stating that the Brooks home environment shows signs of instability for a minor. We need to come in to talk and observe." Anonymous complaint. The 2 words felt like needles, not sharp enough to draw blood, but deep enough to sting. Eleanor leaned aside, making way as if yielding to the wind so it wouldn't create a vortex. "Please come in," she said, her eyes flicking to Stephen like an invisible belt tightening slightly. Composure is muscle. Matthew stood up, hugging his bear, watching the three strangers fill the living room. Isadora emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She froze when she saw the name badge on Karen's shoulder bag, Child Protective Services, a phrase that poor people often dread like a predicted storm. "We'll start with a few basic questions," Karen said, opening her notebook, her two colleagues stepping back, one holding a tablet. "Who is the child's primary guardian?" Stephen raised his hand. "I'm the father, the primary guardian. Divorce and custody papers were filed last week. The child's mother has not requested visitation." Karen nodded. She looked up, surveying the living room, the gray fabric sofa, the bookshelf, the toys tidied into a woven basket. Matthew's drawing of the two-roofed house, now neatly hung on the wall. The anonymous complaint states that the boy is frequently yelled at, severely forced to do excessive chores, and shows signs of parental identity confusion caused by a woman in the house impersonating the mother. She paused, looking directly at Stephen. "How can you explain this woman?" Eleanor answered first, her voice steady as a perfectly taut thread. "Isadora is Marisol's, the boy's mother's twin sister, lost since infancy, recently confirmed. She was once, due to poverty and being exploited, asked by Marisol to house sit for a few hours when Marisol was absent. We have terminated that arrangement. Isadora currently lives here as a relative, not playing anyone's mother. We understand confusion can occur with a 7-year-old, so we're working with a counselor to correctly name the relationships." She turned to Matthew. "Matthew, answer Ms. Karen. In this house, who is Dad? Who is Grandma? Who is Isadora?" Matthew gripped his bear tightly, but his eyes were bright, not evasive. "Dad is Dad Stephen," he said, pointing at Stephen. "Grandma is Grandma Eleanor, and she is Ms. Isadora. I call her Ms., not Mom. My mom left, but Ms. Isadora sings Cielito Lindo well, and she doesn't yell at me." Karen took notes. A colleague approached the sink to check the dishes, opened the refrigerator, and glanced at the schedule taped to the door. Therapy 3 p.m., soccer, sat 9 a.m., dentist, through 4 p.m. Karen looked at the traces of daily life picture books, homework, smiling face stickers. "Who made the complaint?" Stephen asked, his voice soft but unwavering. "I have the right to know, to protect my son from manipulation." Source confidentiality laws prohibit disclosure," Karen replied. "But we will verify. I need to speak with the boy privately for 5 minutes." Eleanor nodded. "We trust you are here to do your job. Matthew, go with her for 5 minutes, then we'll have lunch." "Okay," Matthew said, his voice slightly shaky, like a string tuned to a high note yet clear. The boy walked into the adjacent room with Karen. The door clicked shut, a small sound that Eleanor heard like a watch hand locking onto a mark. Every second was fateful. Isadora stood still, her hands clasped. Stephen turned to his mother. "This is Marisol's move." Eleanor nodded. "Anne Graham's." She didn't need to say the last name. In this house, the first name was enough. 5 minutes later, Karen stepped out, nodding lightly. "I found no signs of abuse or neglect. The boy seemed stable, attached to his grandmother and father. Regarding the impersonation issue, I will note the exceptional circumstances. But," she paused, looking at Eleanor as if to balance the scales, "I advise the family to proactively document everything, keep up the counseling appointments, and, if possible, ask the counselor to write periodic reports. If there are more complaints, we will return." She closed her notebook, her expression softer. "And if the source of the complaint is the mother, the court will observe how she is creating interference." She didn't promise, she just dropped a sentence like a paperweight. When the door closed, Eleanor exhaled. She placed her hand on her chest, feeling her heartbeat was no longer racing like a horse. "You see," she said, looking into the near void, as if at a milestone, "this is when we must be persistent. They attack with fear. We respond with procedure." In the afternoon, the group counseling was held at the community center on Indian School Road. The meeting room smelled of drip coffee chairs arranged in a circle. Stephen sat among the divorced men, twirling the old wedding ring he hadn't fully removed from his finger, a small relic of habit. The facilitator, a silver-haired man named Carl, spoke in a calm Midwest tone. This week we talk about withdrawals, those moments when you want to call the person who hurt you just because you fear the void. Stephen twisted his lip, recognizing that feeling, like recognizing the dustiest corner of the house. He recounted the CPS call, the pain that couldn't be blamed on anyone but his own poor decisions over the years. "I chose silence," he said. "Now I'm learning to say no and taking responsibility for watching my son cry without trying to fix it with a lie." Carl nodded. "Exactly. We don't fix pain with a lie. We commit not to let lies be used as a painkiller." After the session, a man approached, introducing himself as Miguel, an electrician. "Need a painter?" he asked. "I'm free on weekends. I can help you turn your kitchen drawing into something tangible." Stephen smiled. "Yes, I do." A handshake, not salvation. It was a commitment to sweat. While Stephen was at the group, Eleanor took Matthew to a play date and then went to Mr. and Mrs. Jones's house. Isadora went along carrying a bag of supplies, juice, milk, medicine, new towels. Lucy was already there, wiping the window frame light pouring into the dilapidated room as if something had just been invited in. "Are you feeling better?" Eleanor asked. Mrs. Jones smiled, her dry lips cracking. "I've lived long enough to hear this girl call me Mom, and I'm happy." She reached out to touch the bedside table where Eleanor had placed a framed photo of Isadora and her from the week before, two similar faces, one old, one young, looking straight ahead. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes teary. "I kept someone else's secret for too long. I was afraid of being called a child thief. I chose silence. That silence hurt her." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "You did what you thought was rescuing a child. Today we use our voices to rescue the rest." Lucy pulled Eleanor out onto the porch, her voice low. "Eleanor, you need to know this. I once saw Graham Whitfield, that man, going in and out of the old office building on Camelback where a adoption consultation service operated. They aren't bad on paper, but something felt wrong. I saw young girls carrying what were essentially their own children walking out with empty eyes." Lucy took a deep breath. "When I heard the twins' story, I thought Graham might know more than a lover should." Eleanor looked into the distance, the palm trees reducing the sound of the wind into faint threads of sound. "Are you willing to testify if needed?" Lucy nodded without blinking. "Yes, I've been afraid my whole life. Today I'm not afraid anymore." They looked at each other, two women, two kinds of fear, one kind of courage. That night, just as Stephen got home, Eleanor's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered, "Hello," on the line. A smooth man's voice had the thickness of someone who knew how to sugarcoat words. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Graham Whitfield. I think we should talk like adults." Eleanor waited in silence. "I'll stop by your house tomorrow at 10 a.m. We can make an agreement to smooth things over. I'm a realist. You should be too." Eleanor heard the word agreement like someone in the desert hearing the phrase artificial rain. She asked, her voice even, "What is your agreement?" "Well, simple," he said. Stephen signed some papers related to the house transferring a small percentage of ownership to Marisol. "In return, we will stop all the nuisances. CPS won't return. The anonymous calls will stop. And I can help him find a better job. My firm is developing a housing project. I'm generous. You should accept." Eleanor moved the phone away, just enough not to miss a beat, then put it back. "You come," she said, 10 a.m. She hung up. No tremor. She turned to Stephen. He had heard enough from his mother's expression. "I don't want CPS to come back," he said honestly, "but I'm not selling the house." "We don't sell our boundaries," Eleanor replied. "Tomorrow invite Rachel over. Ivan too. Lucy as well. We'll let him talk first, then we'll let him know this house doesn't welcome a man who uses smooth sailing like a switchblade." She picked up the house book, writing a big line, Graham, 10 a.m. Plan, let him talk record, Arizona law, one party knows. Sign nothing. Do not argue. Push back to the lawyer. Lesson: do not use silence to buy false peace. 10 a.m. The Phoenix sun was skin-peeling bright. Graham arrived on time, blue-striped shirt, dark tie, a steel-faced watch larger than necessary. He entered the house as if entering a conference room he believed he'd paid to rent. "Mrs. Brooks," he smiled, extending his hand. Eleanor did not shake it, not out of rudeness, but because she wanted to give him a space to hear his own footsteps echoing too loudly. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to a chair. Rachel was already there, her blue briefcase by her feet. Ivan leaned silently against the kitchen counter. Lucy sat at the end of the sofa, hair neatly tied, her eyes alert, like someone who has slept enough to speak truthfully today. Graham looked around, a slight sneer, when he saw the number of audience members. He took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes accustomed to evaluation. "I don't want to waste time," he began. "Let's be direct. Marisol," he said the name with a clear possessiveness, "is in a vulnerable situation. She needs a portion of the assets. I'm here to protect her. Stephen can make a wise decision, sign over 15% of this house to her. No need for court drama. I will ensure CPS loses interest in your family. And I have housing projects. Stephen, you're an architect. I can help you." "How will you make CPS lose interest?" Rachel asked, her voice as smooth as glass. Graham smiled. "In this city, everyone knows someone, meaning a phone call." Rachel nodded, drawing a circle on the table with her finger, like marking it with chalk. "Thank you for clarifying." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, looking at Graham with the eyes of a woman who is past the age of needing to prove anything. "Do you think we don't know the law?" she asked. "Do you think one phone call can stop CPS forever? Do you think intimidating us with nuisances will make us sell the house and our self-respect cheaply?" She placed her hand on the house book without opening it, just placing it. "This house was once silenced by lies. It has just learned to breathe loudly. You cannot buy that breath." Graham shrugged, placing a thick, bulging envelope on the table. "I'm not buying breath," he said. "I'm buying time and peace. Everyone has a price." Lucy laughed a laugh that landed where people didn't expect. "How many other rooms have you said that in?" She leaned forward, her voice low. "I've seen you go in and out of the building on Camelback. I've seen girls walk in pregnant and walk out not pregnant. How did you buy them? Or did you just help them find a way out and collect a commission? And about the twins, do you know the original story? Or did you just see two identical faces and think you could use them as two pawns?" The air temperature dropped half a degree. Graham tilted his head, his gaze darting around the room like someone contemplating opening or closing a switchblade. Rachel opened her briefcase, pulling out a thin envelope. "This is the court's notice of temporary asset preservation," she said. "Any transfer during the divorce process will be reviewed as void. And this," she slid another paper forward, "is a letter from the district attorney's office inviting you to discuss a preliminary investigation regarding alleged illegal adoption brokering activities. Legal advice. You should say my lawyer will contact you and leave." Graham stood still. 1 second, 2 seconds. He smiled again, a smile adjusted to the status setting. "The old woman knows how to set a table." He picked up the envelope, tapping it lightly on the edge of the table like someone tapping a cigar box. "The game is over. I wish you, happiness in your ethical way." He turned to leave. As his hand touched the doorknob, Eleanor said one last sentence, not loud but sharp. "I once believed smooth sailing was the goal. Now I choose right. You have no ground here." The door closed. The sound of the hinge this time resembled the sound of a post being firmly planted. Ivan sighed with relief for the first time that morning. Stephen closed his eyes, then opened them. Rachel gathered the papers, nodding to Eleanor. "Next step, I'll file for a temporary restraining order against harassment, and—" she looked at Lucy. "Are you ready to sign the affidavit?" Lucy nodded. "Ready." Isadora stood by the kitchen doorway, her hands still dusted with pancake flour. She said softly, "I apologize for being in their game. I will stand on this side." Eleanor turned, touching the back of her hand. You've been standing since the night you told the truth. After the confrontation, a series of days passed free of major drama, but full of the details that build a spine. Stephen scheduled a time with the electrician. Miguel remeasured the kitchen and took down the old wall cabinets. Matthew started Saturday morning soccer class, his first kick drawing a new smile. Isadora changed her documents, applied for a social security number, Lucy accompanying her. They stood outside the post office in the sun, taking a smiling picture, the wind blowing their hair askew. Eleanor volunteered to read at the community center. She read The Velveteen Rabbit to the children, her voice low and warm, pausing at the line. When a person is loved for a long, long time, not just to be played with, but really loved, then he becomes real. She felt her eyes sting like someone who had just bitten into a deeply sectioned orange. On a Thursday evening, Stephen was rummaging through old storage boxes in the garage for tools when he accidentally found a shoebox containing letters Marisol had sent him before the wedding. He carried them into the kitchen, setting them down like a heavy stone. "Mom," he said, "I want to make a decision, burn or keep." Eleanor looked at her son. "What do you want?" "I want to remember the good part of that person, but I don't want those letters to make me weak." "Then write a new letter," Eleanor said. "Write it to your 5 years from now self. State clearly what you saw, what you learned, and that you won't surrender your authority to anyone again." Stephen nodded. He took his notebook and wrote. When he reached the line, "I use silence as a shield to avoid arguments. From now on, I'll use silence to listen and use words to set boundaries." He stopped writing, took a deep breath, and thanked the silver-haired woman standing by the sink without looking at him, allowing him to hear his own voice. Amidst the quiet rhythm, a small storm still found its way. Late one evening, Stephen's phone lit up Marisol. He looked at the screen, remembering Carl's words, the withdrawal. He answered. Marisol's voice was soft as a cloud before a storm. "Do you miss me?" Stephen looked at his reflection on the kitchen window. "I miss the person I thought you were," he replied. "I'll always be grateful for the good memories, but now we only talk about Matthew through lawyers." The other end was silent for a long moment. Then she blurted out a vague sentence. "You're as bland as your house." "My house is stable," Stephen said, hanging up his hand steady. Eleanor stood in the shadows, nodding subtly like a counterbeat. Her son had just played through a difficult note. A week later, CPS sent a letter, complaint file closed, due to lack of evidence, no further monitoring required. Matthew brought the letter to his grandmother like a strange flower. Eleanor taped it inside the cupboard door where the family hung small certifications that only those in the house would open to quietly admire. But the story wasn't just about clearing debris. It was also reconstruction. The new kitchen began. Miguel arrived with a ladder, an old radio playing light country music. Stephen held the hammer. Isadora held the tape measure. Matthew wore a toy construction helmet, imagining himself the supervisor. Eleanor made a pitcher of lemonade, placing the glasses on the temporary counter. "What's after the kitchen?" Eleanor asked Stephen. "The backyard, he replied. "I want to build a small arbor for grapes so Matthew has a place to read." "And for honest conversations," Eleanor added, smiling. Mid-sawing. Lucy rushed in, clutching a bundle of papers. "New development," she said, catching her breath. "A girl I met at the Camelback Center agreed to talk to a local journalist. I made the connection. They're going to investigate. Graham's name is on the list of philanthropists on the surface, but there are signs of unverified donations being transferred back and forth." Eleanor set her glass down, looking out the window where the sun was pouring like honey. "Be careful about your safety," she said. "Those men, they don't lose just because of an article." Lucy nodded. "I know, but I'm not going alone anymore." In the evening, the family tried out the new kitchen, only the countertop installed, no cabinet doors, yet making simple tacos. Matthew sprinkled cheese on top like snow, his eyes crinkled in a smile. "Mom," he turned to Isadora, then quickly corrected himself. Ms. Isadora, what should I bring to class tomorrow?" Bring the letter you wrote to yourself, Isadora said. You promised your teacher that everyone would write a line thanking someone. I'll thank Grandma for singing in the right rhythm, Matthew replied, making everyone laugh. Late at night, Eleanor opened the house book. Writing today, the house learned to say no and learned to say thank you. Lesson those two words nourish each other.